Recording resumed. Okay, we're now back to wrap up the showish. Yeah, wrap up this way. I'm almost thinking we should leave the hardware box stuff till next week, because that's something I'd kind of rather do with all three of us than just you and me.
Alright.
The same thing with the last comment. Before we move on to the two comments, was there anything else we were going to say on Open Office, or any of the Oracle stuff? Or I think we were done with Open Office.
Yeah, no, I'm done with that.
Okay. You know, we get this top comment a few dozen times. This one was actually in the video comments as opposed to just nasty PMograms. I don't know how else to explain this. We've addressed this 3 or 4 times. Like Linux will get plenty of market share when it becomes less fragmented. Other than the fact that there's more than one Linux OS, I don't really look upon it as excessively fragmented. I mean, there's GNOME versus KDE, but it's still Linux. And there's a lot of GNOME stuff that works on KDE and vice versa. It's not 100%, because it never will be. But you use more than one Linux distro. Once you get the hang of using one Linux distro, other than the idiosyncrasies of the individual OS and what their logic of what packs should be included by default, what things should be there, what things should have to be added on by the end user, yada yada and so forth. But for all the bashing that gets done here, you know, because Distro X just doesn't have the right stuff out of the box, and that really is the extent of bashing that goes on over here, I have yet to find an end-user-based Linux distro that most of the vast majority of what you need isn't in the repo, and you can't go somewhere or download the RPM or deb for your distro. Or I mean, it's. Am I missing something? What is this fragmentation that everybody keeps going on and on and on about? It's like it's fragmented. It's fragmented. There's 50 million Linuxes.
They just see multiple distros and think it's fragmented. I mean, the fact is that even though Debian and Ubuntu are different and are not binary compatible, the vast majority of things will work with each other.
Right. It's like, and the things where specialized things come into task, the individual distros realize it's their responsibility to do the little bit of extra work that's needed for the pack and the source code, and that's what the repos are about. You know, we went and did this specialized work for you.
Right. And it's a lot easier. It's easy from what I know to just package something for a different distro.
I would still argue the average end user is never going to do self-packaging.
No, what I'm saying is that from a developer standpoint, I would say that it's easier. From a developer standpoint, it's easier to make something work across, the top 25 Linux distros than to make something that's made for Windows work with Mac.
And vice versa. Something for Mac work with Linux or Windows.
So even though you might see it's fragmented, it's easier to just make this one piece of software work across pretty much all the Linuxes that you want than to make a simple transfer from the two biggest. So it's,
yeah, it's like, so I was making sure I'm not like speaking smoke there, because you're more familiar with programming and compiling than I am and stuff like that. It's like I've done it once or twice, but that's like it's like I've largely not had the need. It's just I think it's the perception, and the perception, the mindset from coming outside of Linux, and this is more an education thing that Linux needs to take responsibility for, in educating the end user. Because the general mentality, goes back to the whole PC versus Mac thing and everything else, and that, well, when you switch from one OS to another, everything changes. because that's the way it is between the Unix of OS X and the, oh dear God, spaghetti code of Windows. And that you must give up everything in this world and come over here, or vice versa. And the reality is, in Linux, that's not so much the case. Like, you can go from Ubuntu to PC-Lin to Fedora to Arch to SON. They're different in that some are more geared towards different classes of users. Some are more geared towards server environments. Some are more geared towards end users. Some are more geared towards minimalist installs, in which case 98% of the packs that you might want might be missing, but you're building your entire system from scratch. It's like, so it's what philosophy do you want to follow for your computer or the system and or device you're making? But they're all still running somewhere between 2.6.28 and 2.6.34 kernel. And, you know, it's like the same thing with hardware. Once the hardware's in there, it's a different mindset. And this goes to what we were going to talk about next week with the, you know, the Linux box stuff. It's educating the end user on what Linux really means, because that's one of the things. It's getting them out of the mentality that Linux is an OS. Linux is a base for many, many OSs that happen to be different but largely interchangeable. Just not fully. It's like the interchangeability is the job of either the software developer or the repo, or the distro development team. This is not something usually the average end user would have to deal with, as things are better supported. But that's, so I don't know. I mean, really, how much effort does it take to repackage, like once you make a binary for Linux, like repackage for, like you say, top 25 distros? How much extra man hour, put it in terms of man hours, how much extra man hours would that be to then go, okay, now I'm going to respit this out in 25 forms?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not big enough to know that. I haven't done enough programming. I hope I would someday know that, but I mean, if anyone watching this knows that, why, they should leave a comment.
I'll ask Jordan next week. I'll also ask Commodore, assuming we do trolling this Friday, just because Commodore, every time I come out here and say you're nuts if you do this, you know, I'm talking about compiling for the extra few frames or yada and so forth, Commodore snaps back at me and says, I've done that. And I'm like, okay. So I suspect he would be able to answer that question. It's like,